why expert predictions of the future are in general so bad. And a key point is why do experts continue to try to predict the future? And I'm talking about political predictions and economists and investment forecasters and things like that. And a key thing is we are designed, we've evolved to look for patterns because it gives us a glimpse into the future.
I'm Jeremy Lakash, a retirement community CEO living in Eureka, Illinois, and you are listening to the Vance Crowe podcast.
Welcome back to the podcast. I'm glad you're here. Well, if you're watching, you can see that we are in studio. Today, I had John Jennings of the St. Louis Trust Company come to the studio and actually record an interview. This is a fascinating conversation with a Renaissance man that is well-read. He can talk about art and how to make decisions. And also, because he is a part of managing people's wealth that have hundreds of millions of dollars, he talks about what is the meaning of success? What do you do if all of your material needs are covered? How do you find satisfaction in life? This is a phenomenal conversation, and John Jennings is a great person to chat with live and in person. I hope you're getting together in person with people as the vaccines roll out and we start to come out of this pandemic. Before we get to the interview, I wanted to let you know about the book club. This month, we are reading Michael Crichton's Jurassic Park, and I have been absolutely stunned with how different this book is than the movie, and it is way more compelling and interesting than even that classic movie was. So if you're interested in joining the book club and you find that maybe by knowing that it's the last Sunday of the month at 7:30, it can give you that extra little effort to get the book done in time, then I hope you'll go to vancecrowe.com/podcast and click on the link for how to join. We often do these in virtual reality, but you don't have to have a virtual reality headset to join us. You can also join on your computer or your cell phone. Another big piece of news coming out is that we are finally releasing one of the classes that we developed inside of the network, How to Introduce Yourself Confidently. This is a class that the network actually helped me to decide was really important to produce. People introduce themselves informally all the time, whether you're going to join a class for the first time, or you're at a networking event, or you have a small chance to be able to describe who you are and what your business is, or what you offer as a service. And people find that oftentimes they have so much to include that their introductions never make them feel very good. So what we do in this class is review how to tell a story that is retold by others. How many details can you include so that people feel like they know you, but you haven't overwhelmed them? And how can you end your introduction so that people know what they can come up and start a conversation with you about, so that you have the very best people in that room come up and start the best conversations with you? This is a really interesting class. It's one that's been developed over time, and I'm really excited to share this with you. So if you're interested in checking this class out, you can go to store.articulate.ventures to purchase this online class and use it at your own speed. We found that people in the network really loved it, and it dramatically helped them feel more confident and comfortable when they go to explain who they are and what they do. All right, without further ado, we're going to head to this interview with Renaissance man, John Jennings. John Jennings, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, this is the first in-person interview I've done with anybody that's not my wife in more than a year. But you and I were having such a good conversation the other day. I thought, hey, man, if you're down with coming down, let's do this in person.
Well, it's been almost 4 weeks since my second shot of the Pfizer jab, so I'm feeling relatively bulletproof.
And when you think about the vaccine, are you concerned about other people that are not vaccinated? Are you going to start looking out for that?
Yeah, I feel pretty good about the efficacy, and I think even if you end up getting it ends up being pretty mild if you're vaccinated. So no, I just, really, it's just so liberating, and I'm just going about my life now.
Were you worried about coronavirus when it was endemic? Yeah,
absolutely.
Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so I wasn't all that worried, I'm going to get it and I'm going to die. But I knew enough people that had it that just got really sick. I just said, this just stinks, so I don't want to get it. And I kind of figured, I did a blog post, I don't know, a ways back, and I called it the COVID golden rule. And it's not necessarily about what you want to do for yourself. You should ask, am I being part of the solution or am I being part of the problem? And being part of the solution meant, wearing a mask, social distancing, doing all those things because you don't want to spread it. Because even if I had it and I was asymptomatic, I'd be part of the problem. So I really tried to be good about social distancing and mask wearing and all that. But it wasn't out of just a huge sense of fear. It was just seemed like the right thing to do.
When I was watching all of this, I have this bent towards liberty that I assumed everyone else had, and this was it was an important thing for me to lose that naivety. Like, liberty is something you have to want, and you have to want it at number one. And one of the things I found that I didn't think of before is you can use someone else's desire to do good for others to convince them to give up their liberty.
Yeah.
And that is the way that I felt about you're not doing the mask for you, you're doing the mask for everyone else. And so that way, if I am not complying with the mask ideal, then I'm somehow selfish. And I thought that this was an interesting trick of logic that may simultaneously be true. That is correct. You are doing it for other people, but then also has really serious ramifications for liberty.
Yeah, it really does. And it was interesting. I'm having my bathroom redone. So I have a lot of, kind of workers in our house. And I was talking to one of them the other day, and he's like, I don't believe in masks and I'm not going to get vaccinated. And, what I said to him is I also believe this, but I was also trying to speak his language. And I said, why don't you want to get vaccinated? He goes, well, I just don't trust the government. I just don't trust any of it. And, I just am worried about the long-term effects of the vaccine. I said, well, really, why I would like you to get vaccinated is because I would like the government out of my life. I don't want them to tell me I can't go to restaurants or bars or I have to wear masks. And I don't want to be told I can't go to the Cayman Islands and go scuba diving, which I love to do. And they won't let Americans in, or only a limited handful. So I said, if you would get vaccinated and then all your friends would get vaccinated and we get to, 90% vaccinations in the U.S., we don't have to worry about any of this anymore. And he was like, yeah, that's really interesting. And I think I probably didn't convince him.
It's an interesting concept, like the trust of government, or really the trust of anyone. Like, I am naive in my level of trust. And I have to watch myself with that, because when the mask thing first came out and they were saying don't wear masks, my wife is an eternal preparer for everything. Yeah. So we had hundreds of masks here. Nice. And so they were like, they're no good to you. You should give them to us. Yeah. So we did. Oh, wow. And then when they did the about face on the masks being like, no, now everyone is required. That's when I was like, I'm out. This, if you can have a noble lie, I think that's kind of Aristotle's concept. Noble lies get real dangerous real fast, because once the government becomes convinced that their lies are noble, then you have a challenge that who should you trust? Should you trust the government that believes they know a truth better than your independent thoughts on things?
For sure. And I think it's fascinating to look at different cultures and how they've reacted to the pandemic. So for instance, Asian cultures, as we all know, they quickly and easily, universally adopted mask wearing when COVID hit. In fact, I think a lot of them were wearing masks before COVID hit. And if you look at it, yes, in America, we have this sense of individualism and liberty, and that's so important. And in some of these other cultures, they actually put the health and benefit of others first. So they're more of communal sort of thinking. Like you think about your society first and your individual second. And a fascinating study looked at, well, why is that the case? And they've looked over the history, and for various reasons, a lot of these Asian countries and cultures have had a lot more in terms of epidemics and pandemics. So they've learned to work together to fight disease, where here in the West, and maybe we're not packed in as much together, we haven't had that. So we haven't had the practice. And if you think about it, that they had the first SARS, they've had more of the MERS, things like that have occurred over in these other cultures, and they were fully prepared. And for us, it was this test drive, and of course we split politically, which was unfortunate. So I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, there is something to be said for how density changes a culture. And for the United States, we had for 200 years almost infinite growth potential. There was just so much space that people could just keep going west. And then eventually you have to start building up. And once you start piling a certain number of people on top of each other, the way that things are in a lot of Asian cultures, your culture has to change, because you can't have the individualistic mentality. And so then you have to have somebody that comes in and mediates how are all these relationships going to work.
Right, exactly. And I think it was Frederick Jackson Turner, who was a historian, and back in the, I think, late 19th century, he came up with his frontier thesis of America. That what made Americans exceptional was that we always had a frontier. And that was just part of our ethos and our culture. And he had these concerns that once the entire United States was settled, that if we no longer had a frontier, we would lose something what it meant to be essentially American. And I think we could see a bit of it pop up again in the 60s with, Kennedy and his moonshot, right? So that was the next frontier, kind of to steal from Star Trek there a little bit. And then you look around now, that what is our frontier? And maybe we don't have one.
Well, and then if you don't, then what happens to those traits that people used to be valued for bravery, for standing for liberty, for trying things in the face of danger?
Yeah.
All of those people that we've had a high selection pressure for, that we want those people to raise up in the hierarchy, now all of a sudden don't have a place. Right. And now they're being told, no, all these traits, they're not only not needed anymore, they're considered toxic. We want them out of here.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's so true. And one of these other people that was working in my bathroom, he had something very interesting to say when we got into all this. He said, John, I think the issue with America right now is it used to be that we all thought we were heading towards the same destination, but we just had different ways of getting there. Because I think the two sides now think that each other's trying to take the country in an entirely different direction. And obviously there's been other points in our history with where this is the case. I mean, obviously the Civil War. I'm sure there's been other times. But I think that's a spot-on observation. And I think that's why we look at each other with such skepticism and judgment, is because one side is like, oh, the other side's going to turn us all into socialists, and the other side says, oh, we're all becoming, I don't know, fascists or whatever. And there's just no common ground.
Yeah, there's a really interesting social psychology student right now. He's getting a degree at Cambridge, so he tweets all of the stuff he's reading about. One of the things he posted that really struck me was that the perception in the U.S. is that the other side, if you're on the right, then the left, the right, that you perceive that they dislike you more than you dislike them.
Yeah.
And at first I was like, no, that's not true. I know that the other side dislikes me more than I dislike them.
Yeah.
And I was like, wait a second.
Yeah.
No, that's probably true. Because I don't actually deeply dislike people that are on, a moderate left. I also really don't particularly like people that are on an extreme right.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
So it makes sense to me when I sit back and think about it that it's in someone else's interest, but not the regular people, to have this sense of polarity, is to believe that other people hate me more than.
Well, none of us get outside of our bubbles. And I just recently, I actually turned 51 tomorrow.
Oh, all right. Happy birthday.
Yeah, thanks. But so when you're 50, you age out of YPO. And YPO is Young Presidents Organization. And so you have to be a president or CEO of a firm of a certain size, and there's all these events. But one of the amazing things is you have these forums. So there was 9 of us in a forum, and we'd meet at least once a month. And you share all sorts of things, issues about your kids and your business and health and, your hopes and your fears. It's really amazing to get to know these people. And in my forum, almost everybody was of a different political persuasion than me. And it was so good for all of us because I highly respect every single one of these other 8 people. And we really care for each other. And I learned so much from them about why they have the views they do. And they learned a lot from me. And, I was like the token, I don't consider myself a liberal, but to them I was a liberal, right? And it was just amazing for me to get outside of my social bubble and to deal with other people. And I truly believe that some high percentage of Americans, 70, 80% of Americans, agree on most things. And that we do want common things. There may be some different ways of getting there. But it's really on the extremes that again, this worker in my bathroom the other day, I think that's the impression that, the people on the right think the left just, they want us to be a socialist or maybe even communist country. And if you actually sit down and talk to most people that are, like you said, center left, that's not what they want at all.
Well, I think, you really hit it on the head about the future, right? Like, if you don't have a vision for where is it that we can go, then there's no way to build together. My wife and I often find that whenever we hit a point where we're like not in sync, it's because we don't have an aligned vision for where are we going to be in a month, where are we trying to get to in a year or in a few years. And so that's when we get back to first principles. Right. But it seems really difficult right now to even say, how would you have a conversation with a group of people about where we want to be in 5 years?
Yeah. Have you ever read any of Jonathan Haidt?
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah. So he has the great analogy that really we have this elephant, which is our preconceived notions, our emotional view, who our identity, and then we have this rider, and the rider is reasoning and logic, but the rider exists to serve the elephant, right? So the second you try to nudge an elephant, the rider defends what the elephant is. So, I think what happens is we end up just talking past each other because our riders are talking to each other, and it's not making any difference at all. And I think for us to come together or to change people's views of things, it takes a bunch of elephants that are all friends, all nudging each other in a certain direction, right? So you have to have this leader that comes in, I think, that says, okay, I'm going to lead your elephants, and we're going to turn it a little bit and not talk to the riders. And I think that's fascinating, and I think what a lot of people on the left don't get about Donald Trump is, like, he spoke to people's elephants directly, right? Like, there was a huge swath of America that were like, oh my gosh, like, this guy gets me on like a cellular level. And it became this emotional attachment. And then you had all these other people in the media and everywhere else than just trying to talk to these people's riders, and it didn't move a thing.
Yeah, and I think that there's some parallel here with I think people were celebrating the end of religion in a big way because you threw off the reins that were being used to hold people back from all of the potential paths that they could take. So I think there was like a very large celebration that, hey, look, we're no longer beholden to this concept that the earth and the stars move by this thing, and now we're free to do what we want. But one of the things that you lose when you don't have a religion is there's nobody talking to the elephants or the riders, right? Now we're all heading in all sorts of different directions.
Yeah, that's fascinating. There's something that I like to call, I haven't really seen this written about much, but I call it the paradox of modernity, of being modern. You know what I'm trying to say here. And, we all hate uncertainty. We like a little bit of uncertainty. We don't want to know how a book or a movie ends, and we like to gamble because of the surprise, that you get. But in general, we don't like uncertainty. Our primary human motive is to resolve uncertainty. So when we feel uncertain, we feel stressed, our fight or flight response kicks in, and when we resolve it, we get a dose of dopamine, which is pleasurable. And so much of the world was so uncertain in ancient times, or even just a few hundred years ago. And so we turned to explanations that were often, supernatural. So if you go to very ancient times, the idea that the sun would rise and march across the sky and set was, the Greek god Helios, with his chariot carrying the sun across the sky. And a lot of different cultures had that. And, religion explained a lot of the things about the world. So when something happened, you'd say, okay, it's God's will or this or that, or I'm going to sacrifice an animal, what have you. But what science has done is it's beaten back a lot of those supernatural explanations. But what is left is just irreducible uncertainty.
Oh, that's not where I thought you were going.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. So you no longer can say, oh, well, a lot of people still do. But for much of human society now, when things happen, you say, well, that just happened because the world is uncertain, And I'll give you an example. So I'm a pretty good skier, a very good skier for a Midwesterner. Okay, so I've been skiing since I was 4 years old. And I always thought that, like, people that got injured skiing were not very good skiers or not in very good shape, and it was at the end of the day or whatever. So in January of 2016, I was skiing with a buddy in Vail, and I was on not a challenging slope for me at all. Like, we had done, some sort of, big black or double black, mogul run or whatever. We took a little break, and then we're like going down like this easy run, but pretty fast, and the weather conditions weren't great. And the next thing you know, I'm missing a ski, and I fall really hard. So it ended up, I shattered my collarbone. A few hours later, I had surgery, and I had a plate and 16 screws put in. And it was so unnerving to me because it just brought home to me. I mean, it in the grand scheme of things, I got better and everything's fine. But what it brought home for me is, things just happen. Like, you can be a good skier, you can be in good shape, and things just happen. And I think it's the same thing too. Like, car accidents happen and disease happen. You can eat well and exercise and still fall, victim to disease. And I think a bit that's why we have this sense of anxiety as a society that seems to be increasing. Is partly this beating back, or as you put it, the end of religion for so many people. And now you're just left with the world is uncertain.
That is very insightful. That's 100% true in my case too. And I find that the way that I limit that uncertainty is I'm always like, man, I'm just really glad I'm not one of those people that can die in a car accident. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
You start to believe that because you're like, it hasn't happened so far, and it happened to all these other people, but not me.
Well, it's the whole problem of induction, right? So you take it's like Nassim Taleb in his book, The Black Swan, talks about the 1,000 days of a turkey. The first 999 days, every day the farmer comes out and gives him food and water, and he's just like, oh my gosh, this guy's amazing. I love him. He's fantastic. And then a few days before Thanksgiving, he chops off his head. Like, there was nothing in the 999 previous days that would have told him what was going to happen on day 1,000. And it was interesting. Real quick story. I was flying, I don't know, it was when did that book come out? 2007 or something. So it was not long after that book came out. I was flying from New York, and then we were going to Chicago, and then changing planes and coming down to St. Louis. So we were flying Southwest Airlines. So we were flying somewhere over the like Pennsylvania or somewhere. And I'm reading this book, and I read that example of the turkey. And I close it and I go, wow, that's like really amazing. And I travel quite a bit for business. I'm like, back, I guess when I was a teenager or something, I used to get nervous flying. And I've flown like thousands of times. And like my blood pressure doesn't even go up at all. My heart rate, I don't worry about it at all. We hit turbulence. Everything's cool. Like, I have zero concern about flying. I was just sitting there thinking, like, how silly is that in some respects? Because something could happen like now. And a minute later, there's this noise, and then the plane shutters. I'm like, what was that? And everybody in the plane starting to talk or whatever. The plane starts losing altitude. And then the captain comes on and goes, no need to worry, but one of our engines just stopped working. And I was like, are you freaking kidding me? Like, what a coincidence. That is amazing. And he's like, so we're going to land in Indianapolis, because there's a long runway and it's close, and we're going to be able to get it down okay. What I was thinking is like, well, I know a plane can fly with one engine, but is there something going on here that could cause the other one to go, wow, this is really freaky, and you can hear people like praying and everything. So we landed, and also talking about like just an amazing culture, Southwest Airlines. So we pull up to the gate, and the flight attendant says, if everybody's cheering, and there's like fire trucks everywhere and everything. So everybody's cheering. We pull up to the gate. Flight attendant says, okay, well, we're going to let you off the plane for a little bit, but don't go anywhere, because we're going to make a few tweaks to this engine, and then we'll get back on and finish our trip. And there's like this like pregnant pause, and she's like, just kidding. I mean, to go through an experience like that and to have the sort of corporate culture where the flight attendant jokes about it was just amazing. So there, that 1,000 days of the turkey is ever etched in my brain because of the experience I had while reading it.
Well, you just reminded me, comedy is one of those things that, is your brain subverting uncertainty, right? Yeah. So you think the only way a joke is really funny is you think you know where it's going, and then all of a sudden it changes, and yet it still makes sense.
Right.
And I think one of the ways
it's that surprise, that relief you get when you find out, right?
And and like once you've figured out the pattern that's there, you get that dopamine release, or as my friend Kate Crosby calls it, the click, right?
Oh, really?
And that click is one of those things that we love, right? We love that click. And I think one of the things that I observed is, I wonder if we could have done the coronavirus lockdowns if there had not been a massive legalization of marijuana.
Oh, yeah, right.
Because I think that one of the things that marijuana does is it gives people that click artificially.
Yeah.
And I think that what otherwise would have been too many people being locked in their houses, not having so much uncertainty, that without the massive influx of pot, I think that you would have seen bigger pushback against that.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Now that you mention it, I've just kind of seen in my social group, I probably shouldn't reveal this, but just this real increase both in drinking and in recreational marijuana usage. Yeah.
And I think it's the click.
For sure.
Because I know that for me, the biggest reason that I like doing marijuana is that it's like there's something that I couldn't piece together. They were disparate ideas. And then you're like, I get it. And I understand it. Yeah. And I get that feeling of it. But then you wake up the next day and you realize, wait, that click? That was kind of artificial. It was not anywhere near as profound of a thought. And yet, I just now 12 or 18 hours or whatever has elapsed. So I had to finally disassociate the click from it, because that's the reason people get a dependency, because our brain is designed to find patterns. Our brain is entirely dependent on that. And had we not had this huge influx of legal marijuana, I think people would have had a much stronger pushback in different ways.
For sure. I think that's right. And speaking of patterns, so I'm writing a book on investment mental models, and the chapter I just finished was really a lot about patterns. It was about why expert predictions of the future are in general so bad. And a key point is why do experts continue to try to predict the future? And I'm talking about political predictions and economists and investment forecasters and things like that. And a key thing is we are designed, we've evolved to look for patterns because it gives us a glimpse into the future, right? So that's a great survival mechanism. So when we can't see a pattern, there's stress, and we see a pattern, we get, again, this dopamine release. And, even experts just see all sorts of patterns and meaningless noise, right? And one of the stories that I tell in my book, and I think this is going to resonate with everybody because you've either thought this way or it's happened to you, is if you think back to the Rams and the time that they went to the Super Bowl the second time, right? So this is when we being a Rams fan, we went up against the rookie 6th-round draft pick Tom Brady, and he broke our hearts. But the Super Bowl was down in New Orleans, and we had a 14-win 2-season loss. Won both of our playoff games, and we go into the Super Bowl as 14-point favorites, right? So I went to that game, and Brady does this last-minute drive, and the Patriots win. So I was at a bar afterwards with some people I sort of knew and some other Rams fans, and I pointed out this kind of amazing coincidence that I had only gone to 3 games all year, and it was only the 3 losses. So I went to the 2 regular season losses and the Super Bowl. And they were just like, wow, what are the chances? Because usually, if you're a big enough fan that you went to the Super Bowl, you would have gone more than just to 2 regular season games. And you would have gone to maybe some other playoff games. And I was just like, what are the chances? And they started saying, maybe you're the only person, Jennings, that went to only the 3 losses of this amazing season. And then, and it was probably helped along by alcohol, people started saying, you're the cause. You are the cause of the loss. And people started to get mad at me. Okay, so I leave New Orleans, unscathed, right? I get back home, and I tell this to a few friends and acquaintances and family members, and people start saying, as the next season approaches, don't go to any games, don't do it. And I do. I go to the first 2 season games, and they're both losses. And then the cries for me to stop going to the games are even louder. And these are, the intelligent people, and I say to them, each one of them, by what possible laws of physics is me showing up in the 60,000 person stadium going to affect how the Rams do? And they're just like, I don't know, but it's there. And that is a perfect example of us recognizing patterns. One exists. There's absolutely a pattern there, but it's meaningless. It's an absolutely meaningless pattern. And then we have the second part of it is we have this drive to explain. So the explanation isn't, oh, it's just random noise. And I could have been the only person that went to the 5 losses out of the prior 22 games. Possible, but it doesn't mean anything. And I think all of us look at these patterns and we try to explain them. And most of the patterns are meaningless. And this is why we look at coincidences like this coincidence and we ascribe meaning to it, right? So it's a fascinating topic.
I'm totally with you. And it's so powerful. If you can spot a pattern that other people can't see, we describe you as a genius, right? And we just got done in the book club reading A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court.
Yeah.
And the way this guy at the very beginning of the book gets out of being put to death is he knows that there's an eclipse coming and they don't know.
Oh, wow.
So the fact that he's able to predict this,
Yeah.
he means he can actually start saying, now I know, now I control the sun, right?
Yeah.
Because I can.
Yeah.
And so you watch how all of the people respond to that. And I think that that's the same thing. Like when people wanted to start knowing who should I depend on for future information about the markets, well, there was this one guy that before the 2008 markets crashed, he said they were going to crash.
Yeah.
And so therefore
I'm going to listen to him.
I'm going to listen to him.
Yeah.
And you see this all the time
Yeah.
that this, and like anyone can look statistically and say like, well, there's no chance that he knows better than everybody else. And yet, Michael Burberry, whatever his name is, the guy in The Big Short.
Yeah.
I mean, that was essentially an advertisement for his firm.
It was.
That he was able to predict that.
And we saw it with a hedge fund manager, John Paulson. Like his fund, he I think he made like $2 billion personally just from his fees in 2008. So yeah, he saw it. He did, The Big Short too. But and I think what's why I bring up John Paulson is his second fund was a gold fund. Right. So he said the next big thing is going to be gold because we're going to have runaway inflation and people aren't going to believe in fiat currencies anymore. So people piled into his fund. They're like, hey, this guy got the financial crisis right. We're going to pile into his gold fund. Of course, it did horribly. Like it was the absolutely wrong time to be in gold. But it just shows that just because you get one thing right, it doesn't mean you've figured everything out.
Yeah. I mean, I remember the end of that movie, right, was the next big thing is going to be water. And then everybody was like, oh, that's obvious. That's exactly right. And maybe it is. I don't know.
Right.
But it does seem like when you watch, that's the reason a documentary is so powerful, right? They're like, we've revealed these patterns that somebody else has figured out. And now we can tell you where it's all going. Yeah. But you're in a unique position for this because you do manage people's money. And so you are expected to know the future. In
our firm oversees nearly $13 billion. So yeah, it's the responsibility.
So how in the world do you explain to people, put your money in my trust,
but
I promise you I can't see the future?
Yeah, and I don't know. Yeah, so that's really challenging. And it's actually something we've learned to discuss with prospective client families. And if they don't like that, they're not going to be a fit long term. So, in fact, I can think of in the last few months, we just had a prospective client family and they were just like, okay, we're interviewing a number of firms and they had just sold their business and have a ton of money and a really attractive client to us in terms of being a fit and all these other areas, but they were like, we're asking each firm, what do you think the stock market's going to do this year and the next few years and et cetera, et cetera. And our answer was, we don't know. Like every year I write, I'm a contributor on Forbes, and every year I write a stock market prediction. The prediction is the same every year. It'll probably be up, but it might be down. And that's just based on, and that could even be wrong, but that's just based on over time, the way things have worked out. And I have more, stats and stuff backing that up, but any more precise than that, and you're probably wrong. I mean, unless you're just lucky. So, and this is a big point in my book, and it's kind of the basic theme of the book, which is if you realize, if you admit the ignorance that you can't predict the future, and that the world, especially the stock market, is just inherently uncertain, and you acknowledge that, and then you invest that way, you'll be a better investor. That this idea that you have to be able to predict the future to invest is just absolutely wrong. In fact, it'll lead you astray because it doesn't work out. There was a study, Jim Cramer from Mad Money on CNBC, very popular show. This investment firm looked at a bunch of his predictions over, many years, and they found that he was correct about 47% of the time. So about what a coin flip is. And there's study after study after study showing that experts are usually no better than a coin flip, but the more confident the expert is, the worse they are. So the more famous the pundit, the worse they are. And that's because overconfidence interferes with our ability to predict. So there was again, I have all these studies, so stop me if I'm telling you too many studies, but I'm writing a book on this. So there was a study from 2004 where they took undergraduate students and then professional stock pickers. And they said, okay, here's a list of 20 pairs of stocks. I want you to go down. Here's all this information on the stocks. You can look at, we're going to give you, their past performance, their analyst projections of earnings, all this different information, the price to earnings ratio, et cetera. So each group of participants was told, pick one of the 2 stocks from the 20 pairs. And we'll see which stock outperforms for the next, whatever year. And they also asked them, how confident are you in your predictions? So the students were sort of confident. They were about I think 59% confident. And they were right. They picked the winner 49% of the time. So exactly, basically 50-50 chance. And most of them, when they asked, how did you pick the stocks? They said, we just guessed. So the investment professionals were nearly 70% confident that they had picked winning stocks and were only 40% correct. And they asked, how did you pick the stocks? And none of them said they guessed. They said, I looked at the information you gave me, but I'm an investment professional. I know these stocks. I know these industries. So over and over, all these studies have shown the more confident you are about your predictions and your knowledge, the worse your predictions are. So you really want to be with an advisor that says, I'm not confident in my ability to predict the future. And in fact, I don't know. And let's take that ignorance and let's invest you that way. It reminds me of On Origin of the Species, has a much longer title, by Charles Darwin. He sets out the theory of evolution. In the last paragraph, he kind of apologizes for it and says, basically, I'm tearing down this idea of there was a supreme being that just micromanaged and caused all this. And he's really saying, it was a lot of randomness and chance that creates evolution. And I love this phrase. He goes, but I believe that there is grandeur in this theory of life. And his point is that it's more beautiful to think about evolution than it is this more simple concept of there's a supreme being that was, micromanaging, creation. And that's kind of how I view the investment markets, that there's grandeur in the view that there's so much randomness and chance and luck and everything going on, and you should invest acknowledging that instead of thinking you have to be able to predict the future, which is really just a fool's errand. You just can't do it consistently. But based on the patterns, if you do get some things right, you think you're good at it.
I think that this also plays out in things that aren't markets, things like art. So my mentor is a 101-year-old guy that taught me to love art. And I kept saying, Pete, if we go around your house here, you have Andy Warhol's cats, you have Boteros, you have Marguerites, you have fantastic art. How did you know that these were really good? And he was like, I just didn't think very much about it. I either liked a piece or I didn't. And I remember reading a study where where they brought people in and they said, okay, you can choose between these 2 pieces of art. One is an abstract piece of art, and one is one of those kind of hang in there kitty things. Right?
Yeah.
And so then they said, you have to choose one of these, and then just go on and you can take it home. And it turns out when they just let people choose, most people chose the abstract one, right? But then they brought another group of people in and they said, okay, now you've got to choose between these 2, but you've got to tell us why you're choosing it. And so when people had to explain why they chose it, then they chose the kind of hang in there kitty, very simplistic. There was something they could explain. They could, I think it's very motivational and that helps me understand it. And then what they did was they let people go home. And then 6 months later, they contacted them. And the people that had chosen the abstract art, the odds that it was hanging up somewhere in their house was amazing, 80%. But the people that had chosen the art based on, we had to explain it, they had almost all either put it away in a closet or given it away to a friend. And so it says something about when you have to ascribe meaning to the intuition that you have going on, it in and of itself changes your decision-making behavior and not necessarily for the better.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Are you an art collector?
No.
Why?
I'll say this. We do go to the Clayton Art Fair and this and that. We do buy art, but we haven't done anything that's a collection. And the most expensive art I've ever bought is single-digit thousands. But what I do have is a Samsung The Frame TV over my fireplace.
I saw this on your blog. This is so. Tell me about this.
Yeah. So it looks like a painting when it's turned off. And there's an art store, and you can pick from thousands of works of art. And there's some great masters in there. You know, there's a lot of Van Gogh and Cézannes and Seurat's and things like that. But then there's a bunch of other things that aren't there. Like speaking of Impressionism, I mean, there's no Roy Lichtenstein or, not Impressionism, but more modern. There's no Lichtensteins or Rothkos or Pollocks or anything like that. But there's just a lot that you haven't heard of. But almost every day, either me or my wife chooses a different work of art. And then it hangs, and it looks just like a painting. Like, people will say, don't you have a TV in here? Like, where do you watch TV? I'm like, that's a TV. And they're like, are you kidding me? So yeah, it's pretty cool. So in some respects, I guess I am collecting art now, but they're just digital. And for my $5 a month subscription to the Samsung art store.
Art is one of those things that I had no exposure to it as a young person, like virtually none. And then even when I did start to get exposed to it, I had no way of being able to say whether I thought something was good or not. But once Pete taught me, art is whatever you think is beautiful. I often have this, like, a story for young people that are thinking about getting married. Pete and I, the very first time he ever met the woman that became my wife, we were at his apartment in New York, and he was absolutely insistent that we walk 20 blocks up and go to this art museum. But he was not going to go. He was just sending Ann and I. Oh, wow. And then right as we're about to walk out the door, he says, Vance, come in here. And he pulls me aside and he says, now, when you go to the art, don't look at the art. Look at what she sees in the art and ask her what she sees, because whatever she sees are the eyes that she's going to view you with. And that's when I was like,
holy cow.
Whoa. So we go, and that's what I did. I was like, what do you see here, Anne? What do you see? And I could tell that this woman was infinitely positive, like could always find a way to like something, even if it was harsh or jarring. But that's when you start realizing art has so much more power than I think what I ever had any concept of. And I think that it's way, way more important. The older I get, the more important art is to me. I don't need to own it, but it is very important to me to be exposed to it.
Yeah, for sure.
So one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about with art is this article I read called Enter the Supersensorium. So it's this entire article written by this, I don't know, he's a neuropsychologist or something, but he's basically saying your brain, when you go to sleep, is trying to do what dreaming is really all about is your brain trying to take all this information that you got throughout the day and the patterns that you thought you had seen. It's going to break those apart and try and match it up in some different way. So the way he describes this is, are you familiar with this concept called overfitting?
Yeah, absolutely.
So for anybody that doesn't know, it's like you show artificial intelligence a picture of a dog. You want to teach it what a dog looks like. You show it 1,000 pictures of a dog, but you accidentally showed it 1,000 pictures of a brown dog. And so by doing this, if you show it a picture of a deer, it says brown, 4 legs, tail, that's a dog. That's overfitting. So what this article about the supersensorium is he's saying when you go to sleep at night, your brain is taking all the associations that fit patterns that you already knew, and it's breaking them apart, and it's refitting them in new and interesting ways, which is why when you wake up in the morning, you suddenly can remember where you put your keys when you couldn't after looking for them for hours, or there's some problem, some mental model you were working on, probably as you're writing. You get really frustrated at night, you go to sleep, you wake up the next day and you're like,
I got it.
It's right there. So that's what he is saying is going on with that. And his overarching point is one of the reasons that we have lowered there are so many people that say I don't get dreams, is that if you expose yourself to entertainment, it is not the same thing as art. Entertainment is always giving you something where you're fitting into a groove. Like you said, we kind of don't know the ending, but like everything already matches, all the archetypes already match. So when you expose yourself to art, you're filling your brain with new things that need to be fit into the pattern. So you're actually forcing your brain to have a lot more electricity, so to speak, while you're dreaming.
Yeah, you know what that reminds me of is I just read recently this amazing, I don't know, it's like 10-page long essay called Creation and Destruction. It's by a guy named John Boyd, and he has since passed, but he was a fighter pilot in Korea. Yeah,
so, the OODA loop.
Yeah, so he created the OODA loop and for people that know what that is, it's for observe, orient, decide and act,
Yeah.
right? And this concept of creation and destruction is partly what gave him the OODA loop. And the OODA loop basically means that you should do what's unexpected, and you should surprise your enemy if you have one, and you should move very quickly. And there's all, I mean, I'm way oversimplifying it. When John Boyd would brief people at the Pentagon on this, his minimum amount of time he want them to set aside is 6 hours. Right. So it's very, it's very in depth. But John Boyd, what he said in Creation and Destruction is that really creativity comes from both of these things, that you have to take something and you have to destroy it and break it into its component parts, and then you put it back together. And it's almost the difference between deductive reasoning and induction. So destruction is deductive, and creating something is inductive, or it's the difference between analysis and synthesis. And he gives this example, and I may not get all of them, but he said if you look at, let's say, somebody going up on a mountain skiing, right? So you think of, okay, you have the chairlift and the skis, and you think of like a kid on a bicycle, and you have the bicycle, and you have a tank, and you have all these other things. He goes, break them down in their component parts. So you're gonna have like these, 30 or 40 different things. So you're gonna have like the turret of the tank and the treads of the tank, and you're gonna have the bicycle wheels and the handles and the ski lift and everything. And he goes, if you take all those, the question then is, how do you put them back together completely differently, that you've created something new? And, I put when I was reading this essay, I put it down, I thought about it a while, and I wasn't really coming up with anything. And you read on, and he says, you can take, parts of the bicycle and the chairlift and the tank treads, and now you have a snowmobile. I was like, wow, yeah. So I think what you're saying with this article is he's saying we're breaking things down. We're doing this destruction or this analysis, and then our brains put things back together, and maybe in different ways, right? So instead of taking a tried and true pattern, which may be a false pattern, you take different data and information and you say, let's jumble them up and put them together differently.
Yeah, my dad used to do this thing that when I was younger used to drive me absolutely insane, which was he would, we'd have our furniture arranged in a way. And most people, once the furniture is put there, until you get a new couch, it all stays there. Right. But every couple weeks, my mom would go away for something for the evening, and he would be like, Vance, come in here. And we'd start moving furniture around. And then every time you enter the living room, you're like, it's all different. But it did make the entire experience of being in our house. It's like being in a new room.
My wife does that all the time. I'm just like, really? Are we going to rearrange furniture again? She's like, yes, we are.
I think it's a good idea. Yeah. And as you're describing this, and I've read a lot of John Boyd, I would say your description of the way he thinks about this is really on point, man. The OODA loop has been an interesting concept because I hear people referring to it all the time, and it's a little bit like, don't you just react to what's going on around you? Isn't that all he's saying? But it's actually much deeper.
Yeah. Well, and he thought that most everybody didn't get it. Like, we all look for shortcuts, and this idea that it's linear, that you do these 4 things in a row. He said, that's really not what I'm talking about. Like, it's much more random and creative than you just follow these 4 things. And he's like, and one of the keys is, and this was interesting to read because it's a lot of how we've set up our company. Is he's like, if you are the general or the head commander, the key is that you have all these, subordinates that you completely trust, and they trust you. And you have to give them a lot of freedom to follow the OODA loop, to observe, orient, decide, and react on their own. Like, that you can't, it takes too long for them to report to you, you decide, and you give it to them. And then there's this power in all these different people having different views of what it means in their situation, and that they have to bring their own talent and creativity to it. And if you think about it, that's sort of against, at least my impression of how the military is usually structured, right? With this very strict chain of command. And he turned it on its head and said, no, you've got to trust. And at each level, you've got to trust those around you and those below you in sort of the organization. And that's really what we've done with our company. And part of it is just me not wanting to work that hard, right? So I'm president of our company, And I realized a long time ago.
Say a little bit about your company so
Yeah,
people can follow along
so
with
we're a multifamily office. So we work with 60 families. There's 55 of us working on 60 families. They're all extremely wealthy all over the country. It's really fun and amazing, what we do. Our goal is to be indispensable partners to our client families. So we do investments and family office and estate planning and any and all things financial for these families.
So this is people that have like many millions of dollars, and they've got to figure out, hey, we can't just keep it in cash, but we can't just like let it ride in the stock market. So we want to figure out, hey, what will happen if we die? How do we manage our taxes? How do you do all the way down to bill paying and those kinds of things?
Yeah. Not for every family, but we do bill pay for a lot of them. We do, cash flow management and budgeting and everything else. So yeah, very wealthy families and with a lot of complex affairs, because as you have money, and especially as that rolls through generations, you have investment partnerships and private real estate and shared houses and trusts and transactions between trusts and entities. So yeah, it's pretty interesting and fascinating. And what I realized years ago is, if I tried to really, if we were more command and control and centralized decision making, like I would have just a ton of, I just wouldn't sleep. I would just have to work all the time. And, really. Well,
your emails would be infinite because it would be like, I need you to make this decision and I can't move forward until that decision is made.
Yeah. So about 10 years ago, I was talking to one of our clients that was the CEO and chairman of a Fortune 500 company, this huge company. And he's just brilliant. And I said to him, what is your advice as we grow? So at the time, I don't know, we probably like 25 or 30 employees. As we grow, what is your advice that we can keep our culture? And he said, and this is not what I expected. He goes, what you should do is you need to have a lot of small teams and no middle management. He said the whole reason corporate structure looks like it does is based out of the military in World War II and Korea and et cetera, where you had a lot of these people returning from the war that went into corporate America or became management consultants, and this idea that you have a general and below that you have full colonels and lieutenant colonels and then majors and captains and all these divisions and battalions and squadrons and all this thing. It was really based on this concept that goes back to when there was cavalry. How many horses could a commander see in battle, right? Or how many fighting men could you see? And this is like why you had this pyramid structure. And he goes, but it's ridiculous and it doesn't work on how you manage people. Instead, you need to have a bunch of smaller teams of people you trust that are little experiments of trial and error. And you take the best ideas from these teams. And he goes, do not have middle management. He goes, because this military way of thinking, you have to have all these layers of officers. He goes, don't do that. It cripples and kills companies. And, that really spoke to me. And again, I don't have like carte blanche, it's a lot of people and a lot of culture and, business partners and everything. So it's not just me, but we all talked about that and other things that we had read and said, yeah, we're going to create this company that's very flat. We're not going to have a lot of hierarchy. We're not going to have a lot of command and control. And we're going to allow each of our partners, our principals, to follow their own OODA loop, which I didn't know was an OODA loop. I only learned about that recently. So yeah, absolutely.
Wow. I mean, so we hear a lot of times that we're stuck in the, our school system is based on the factory worker, but I've never heard the concept of the bureaucracy inside of corporations. But you see that it like so much of the work that gets done is done by the very, very bottom of the hierarchical structure. For sure. And then everybody else is just absorbing some amount of work, and then most of it is dissipated as heat. Yeah. And people don't, what modern man says, I want to go work inside of a bureaucracy? No one, right? Because you don't have like you had said, the benefit of being outside of a bureaucracy is you can say, hey, there's the goal we're trying to get over. Now I can do anything I want to get over that. Yeah. That's fulfilling. That's when you get to find the click and you get to take those dopamine hits that you get from discovering a pattern and making it happen. But in a bureaucracy, you see the click and then it's 4 months before anything can happen because of it.
Yeah, and bureaucracy, I agree with my client and have read a bunch more about it. I think it does kill companies. And then once you get to a certain size, it really becomes difficult. You may be aware of Dunbar's number that says, you can really only kind of know 150 people. And then there's different levels. Like you can only have a handful of like really close friends, then you have other friends and acquaintances, et cetera. But you really can only know the name of and something about around 150 people. And whether that's right or wrong, I think it's
in my experience, it's totally accurate.
It may not be exactly 150, but yeah, that's exactly right. And I think when you look at companies, there is this tipping point once you start getting 100, 150, 200 people where you don't know everybody anymore. And you don't, in our company with 55 people, not only do I know everybody's names, I know probably every single person's kids' names, and I know their spouses' names, and I know in general where they live, and I know something about them. And I go to lunch with everybody, pre-pandemic, I would go to lunch with everybody in our company once or twice a year. And during the pandemic, I have people over to my house to sit outside, and sometimes we watch Blues games, sometimes we just cocktail. So you can do that, but once you get beyond a certain size, you can no longer do it. And some companies have taken this to heart, and I believe it was the company Gore-Tex. All their plants and offices and divisions, they've kept to 150 people. And this is partly because of this Dunbar's number. And they said, as a huge company, we're going to have more than 150 people, but we want to have these smaller enclaves of 150 people that work together as a team. And I just think that's so important. And it's interesting in YPO, again, I've learned so much from YPO, but I'll talk to people and it seems like the main goal for their company is growth. Like they want to get bigger and bigger and bigger and, make more and more money. And that may be well and good, but I always ask the question, well, why? Like, why do you want to grow and why do you want to get bigger? Because it sounds to me like a lot of the things that bigger companies have to deal with are horrible. Like, and this is something I've learned as we've gotten bigger, 55 employees, 60 clients, it means that there's almost always a problem. There's some employee, there's always some issue or an issue with a client, or there's always something that's going on. And, back when we had, say like 30 people and 30 clients, it was like half the number, right? So as you get bigger, there's just more room for you have so many more interactions. I mean, it's probably exponential. So it's probably 4 or 8 times as big when you have 60, because you have so many more interactions and so many more people to manage and deal with. And I just can't imagine wanting to work in a place that has, hundreds of people, which I had before. I used to work at Arthur Andersen, and it was huge. And
the biggest challenge, though, is we live in a world that is rewarding economies of scale.
Yeah.
And so quality becomes this very difficult thing, So a lot of people that I interact with all the time are farmers, and they want to keep their farm as a family farm. They don't want to have to grow, but in order to be able to keep up with the margins of the world, you have to go as big as you possibly can.
Yeah.
And the only limiting factor is, like, for a dairy farm, people don't realize this, eventually there is a falling off that you just can't bring hay in from far enough away, or you just can't get rid of the manure. So you can only pack so many dairy cows in.
Oh, really?
But outside of that, right, you can just we'll just keep adding farm, field after field after field. We'll just buy more combines. We'll hire more workers. So this expansion, whereas most people want to have that kind of quality life. How do you think this gets meted out in a modern world?
Well, actually, one of our prior conversations, we talked a bit about Peter Thiel's concept of secrets, right? So this is something that you believe, and it's not just that you believe it and others don't, but it's almost like if you talk about it, somebody else is going to think it's crazy. So in one of my favorite discussions with this, it's Ben Horowitz of Andreessen Horowitz, and he gave the commencement speech at the Columbia University Engineering School, probably like 2015, 2016. The entire speech is just amazing. I'd highly recommend anybody listening to look it up on YouTube. But at about minute 5, he talks about the idea of secrets. And he says, okay, what I am is I'm a venture capitalist, and I invest in companies. And let me talk about what I do in terms of ideas. If someone comes to me and they say, my idea is I want to make cell phone batteries last longer. He's like, that is an amazing idea, and I am not going to invest in your company, because everybody thinks that's a good idea. So like Panasonic and Samsung and Apple and everybody's going to be doing that. So I'm not going to invest in that. He goes, but I'll give you an example. He goes, a few years ago, I had somebody by the name of Brian Chesney come into my office, and he said, I have this secret. And the secret is I've been renting out an air mattress in my living room. And I've done some research, and I found out that it used to be, back before we had cars and planes and trains, that people stayed at inns. And because they didn't travel very far, they knew what the inn was going to be like. They'd go, oh, it's Gertrude's Inn. I know that's pretty nice, and that's better than Sam's Inn. So you knew where you were staying. But then as we became more mobile, you needed to know the quality of where you're staying. So that's when you started getting Holiday Inns and Howard Johnson's and Ritz-Carlton's and everything, because you know the level. Like if you stay at a Courtyard by Marriott, which I often do when I travel, I know what I'm getting. But what's happened now with the internet is you don't need that any longer, because you can see it online, you can have reviews. So my idea is I want people to start renting out rooms in their house. And Ben Hoare said, Ryan, that is a horrible, horrible idea. Like what if you rent out your room to a serial killer? And he goes, but it's fascinating, tell me more. And he goes, so of course I invested in it, and it's Airbnb, and it's an amazing investment. So you have to have, to really be successful, you have to have a secret. And where I'm coming around to your question, our company's secret is that there's a trade-off in business between customization and scalability. It's true probably in every business, but especially in financial services. So people move towards scalability because it's more profitable. But our secret is we don't do that. We stay as custom as we can possibly be. And the secret is that's a really good business, and it's quite profitable, and almost nobody else is doing it.
Oh, man. John, that is beautiful.
Well, thank you.
I absolutely love that. And I think because it gets at, and we've both talked about the Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, right? It gets at that concept.
Right here.
Yeah, somewhere around. It's in the book club. So that concept of finding a way to be happy with quality.
Yeah.
And you have, for people that don't know, you have a prolific blog that you're putting things out. I don't know if it's every day or almost every day.
It used to be every single day, and now it's 2 or 3 days a week, which is much healthier. I really worked with my therapist a lot on not sending it out every single day.
Well, so one of the latest articles that you had was on success.
Yeah.
And I read that after a particularly rough time just recently, being like, what is the goal of what it is that I'm working on? Yeah. And you wrote things down there that I was like, actually I maybe already have success and I just am not recognizing it. So talk about that article.
Yeah, so I've been collecting definitions of success for years. I forget what caused it to happen, but I just thought it was interesting. And I guess part of it is dealing with and helping these client families where, our average client family is like $200 million. So it's like every single one of them, in terms of a common, non-wealthy person would be like, I just won the lottery, or, a huge lottery.
Won the super lottery.
Yeah, I won this, I won the big Powerball, and after taxes and payout, this is what I'm left with. And so it's interesting to see it's allowed me to have this perspective that success isn't necessarily just money, right? And it's not just building a great business. I mean, I've seen some people that built amazing businesses and sold them for a ton of money. And on one hand, you'd go, they're incredibly successful, but sometimes that can be destructive to other areas of life. So I've collected these definitions of success, and this blog post was my 3 favorite definitions. And the first is kind of funny, but it kind of leads in the other two. One that I read years ago was, you're successful if you have the ability to schedule your day around a nap. And it just says you're in control of your schedule instead of your schedule being in control of you. And it means that you have a certain amount of freedom and control over your life. And that is a real luxury. And, I know a bunch of people that aren't able to do that.
Well, it's funny you mention that. So I used to work at Monsanto, and I was hyper successful there. I just really hit a niche. Yeah. I was focused on something. And one time I wanted to take a nap. So I laid down in my office, I closed the door, and somebody came in and found that I was napping, and they were outraged. And I was like, what does it matter if I take a nap? Like, is there some work that's not getting done? But it was like, yeah, absolutely. Like you're going to pay for this.
Well, and partly because this definition of success, and because I enjoy, if I'm tired, I take a nap, right? And, sometimes my schedule doesn't allow it, but in general, a lot of days I can take a nap if I need to. And so when we designed our new offices a few years ago, we actually have a room that's for napping. Well, actually, it's not just for napping. It's also the room that is used by our new mothers in terms of lactation. So back pre-pandemic, I felt like I felt pretty good about napping there, unless, we had somebody that was regularly using the room for a more important reason. And, then you kind of feel bad if I'm going to somebody and I'm like, hey, I'm just kind of wondering, kind of what your lactation schedule is today. Because I'd like to have a nap. But, but again, I'm in this unique position where I'm president of the company. So I almost want to let it known, and I do, that I nap occasionally in the nap room. We call it the Zen room, actually, speaking of the Zen, or motorcycle maintenance. Because I think, I would like people to recognize that, man, if you're tired, take a break. And if you need to nap, do so, right?
And naps to me are the time when I get the most vivid dreams, because you're just in the level 1, level 2 sleep. Yeah, in fact, lately I've been having this dream. So I take naps, and my dad used to have a room in his own little brokerage house that he would just go back and take naps. But lately my dream when I wake up is I can see myself being just this tiny speck of consciousness, and you zoom out and you're in St. Louis, and then you zoom out, you're North America, then the Earth, then, the universe, and you realize the only place that I can experience is right here in this consciousness, and you're asleep, wake up. And so I have this being thrown into the world. And then you're, it's 2:00 in the afternoon, and you're like, oh, I better get to work. I got to get some stuff done. Right. But I think about that when I read your definition of success, and I was like, that is so powerful, because you're right. It's the one thing I want the most in the world is the ability to feel consciousness in the middle of the day, like an awareness that the fact that you have a spark of life is so rare and so unique that you can only experience it if you're aware of it.
Exactly.
So the other two definitions.
Yeah. So one of the other definitions, and I think this is spoken, I've gotten a lot of great feedback on this. I actually had a friend of mine call me last night who's the CEO of a company, and he was just like, I needed to read this. I needed to read it now. He's like, you don't know this, but I'm at an inflection point in my career, and I needed to hear this. And I've had a few other people email me or text me and say, I'm in an inflection point. And really the one that spoke to them is this idea. And I had read it in a book years ago, and it was kind of success, not in, success, it was more income. But the secret is that as you move up the income ladder, you're paid more and more for who you are rather than what you do. And that really spoke to me. And it's something that I really try to mentor a lot of the people in our company on, because, you start out doing, and especially if you're good at something. And I had this situation where, I was trained as a lawyer, and I was a estate planning and tax lawyer at a big law firm. I worked at Arthur Andersen, and I did a lot of technical tax stuff. And I had this performance review when I was about 30. And the head of the tax division, and I always remember this because he did all these reviews of everybody that was a manager and above at the tax division. And he actually took the time and effort to really think about me and really focus on my career, because he could have just said, which he did, Jennings, you're so smart, you do such good work. And he said, you are one of the best technical tax people I have ever worked with. You make our office here in St. Louis better. You help everybody around you. You are such a resource. And he could have stopped there, and I would have awesome. He goes, but if you continue on this path, you will never make partner here. He goes, we can always buy technical. People that have true success have the soft skills. They can bring in business. They can deal with clients. They develop relationships. They have networks. They invest in others. They lead. They learn. They teach. They do all these things. What do you want to do? You'll have a fine career if you're just a technician. I was like, oh my gosh. So I went and thought about it, came back, and I said, I want to be instead of just do. And it was really hard because I knew I was great at something, and I didn't know that I was good at this other thing.
Yeah, you're at a local Optima, and the only way to get better at the other one is to give up being the technical expert. But that's really, really uncomfortable.
Yeah, and early in our company, I was the estate planning expert in our company, and then I was the investment guru in our company, and I was our private jet expert and all these other things. And at each stage, I gave them up. I hired or really put forth us hiring people that replace me in those areas. And I'm no longer any of those things. I mean, I know some about it still, but I've replaced most of, or a big portion of, what I do. And, really, I've seen with my career, what my value I bring is network and ideas and, contributions, culture, all these intangible things. And I believe that everybody has their own superpower, at least one. Some people have multiple. And I want our people to see what their superpower is and move towards it. And hopefully that means they can make this leap from, spending most of their time doing, to most of their time doing something else that's more intangible, but may bring more value. And I just think, personally, it's more fulfilling. For some people, they love just doing it. That's great, but I think it should be a conscious decision or a conscious choice. What do you want to be, not just what do you want to do every day? And, I have these friends that talk about retiring. So I'm, turning 51 tomorrow, and they'll be like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to retire. What's your number? And like that concept is just like foreign to me. If they said, what do you want to be doing in 10 years? I want my job to look a lot different than it is now. But it's because I'll move on to other things and find new interests and give up other things that are, more doing. And yeah, so I think it's fascinating.
And people really responded to this article that you wrote.
Yeah. So it's interesting. What I've learned by writing this blog, which is called The Interesting Fact of the Day. If you want to find it, it's IFOD, theinterestingfactoftheday.com. But, some things are just facts. Like, so a few weeks ago, I did one on, what's the brightest beam of light in the world? And it actually is the spotlight that shoots out the top of the Luxor Hotel that's, shaped like a pyramid. And there's all these facts on how incredibly bright it is. And it's just crazy bright. So, that's, I think that's pretty interesting. A lot of people thought that was interesting. But the thing that really, the ones that get a lot of clicks and get passed around, I get a lot of comments on, are the ones that are more philosophical, like definitions of success, or, some reflections on being an adult and how we're all just making it up as we go along. And, it's things like that I think really resonate with people, which has been interesting to me. And, things that I think are super interesting that don't get a lot of clicks or comments, it's just interesting to me. They need to be things that are relevant to people. So, years ago, I did one on, what happens to a bullet shot straight up in the air, just it's fascinating and, very few clicks. Or, about these LIGO detectors that detected, the collision of two supermassive black holes and their gravitational waves. And the Nobel Prize in Physics was actually granted to the scientists that came up with this in 2017. And they were the most precise instruments that have ever been created in the history of humanity. And it's just amazing and fascinating. And finally, 100% confirmed the Einstein's theory of general relativity. And it got 1/5 of the clicks that an average day does. So it's just interesting to me to see what people think is interesting.
That is one of the most profound things about producing content is I'll do an interview that I think is like doing cocaine or something. I interviewed this guy named Lee Cronin, who I would guess will be the first person to make the jump between chemistry and biology, make inorganic life for the first time. Wow. And you put that out there, and people are like, that's okay, right? Yeah. But I put out one with a mom that works on a pig farm, and that she's raising 3 kids. That people just go bananas over it. And for me, I have no idea why. And the harder I look at the why, the less I'm able to grab it. But I know from all the articles that you're suggesting, I do love the facts. So I know the room in the Luxor Hotel gets 300 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm reading your thing. But I understand where you're coming from on that. I wonder why it is that the philosophical is so drawn. Because I think the woman that's the mother of 3 kids on the pig farm, what we ended up ultimately talking about is how are you managing the stress of raising kids.
It relates to the listeners' everyday lives, and I find that in my blog. If it relates to somebody's everyday life and it allows them to maybe have a slightly different perspective or do a little bit better or think a little better about themselves. On the being an adult one, one of my main points on that is especially being a parent, we're just all making it up as we go along, and even in business and everywhere else, we're just making up. We don't know what we're doing, and we do gain experience, and that's great, but every day is a new day, and we just do the best we can. And I got a lot of people saying, oh my gosh, Jennings, you just seem like you have everything so figured out. And it was so amazing to hear that you don't, and I think it's almost like the Facebook or the Instagram effect, where everybody just only puts on their good days. They only post pictures when they look amazing. And, I've become obsessed with my Peloton. And one of the instructors, on her Instagram feed, and she's super fit, and so she did this little video, and she's like, here's what I look like in this outfit posing like this, and she goes, now watch me bend over this way, and you saw these little rolls of fat, and again she's super fit. She's like, that's what doesn't go on Instagram. And she goes, and what you all don't understand is like, I look at myself and I see those rolls of fat and I'm like, oh man, come on, and everybody else is just like, oh, you're so fit. I'd love to be like you. And I think everybody thinks maybe some people have things figured out and they don't.
Yeah, you mentioned Peter Thiel earlier, who's
Yeah.
somebody that I really follow, and one of his philosophers that he finds a lot of value in is a guy named Rene Girard. And Rene Girard, I think, will become, he's like Carl Jung, like where he was really out of vogue, and now I think there's going to be a lot of people that start reading and following. But one of the things he talks about is a concept called mimetic desire. And it's not memes, M-E-M-E, but mimetic is in mimic. And he basically says, the human beings, our superpower, the reason that we are able to outcompete Neanderthals is that we cooperate. And that cooperation is the human superpower that also has some self-limiting functions, which are, we don't know what we want. And so you look out at the world and there's so many things that you could want that you have no idea what to go for. So instead, what you do is the same thing that a little baby does, right? A baby, when they first start meeting their parents, they're watching them and they're trying to make the same mouth gestures as their parents. And then they're trying to figure out, well, what does mom and dad want? I'm going to look and I'm going to want that too. Well, when we get older, we start looking at, I don't know what I want out of all these things, whether it's a car, a beautiful house, or higher up on the hierarchy. So instead, I'm going to look to what other people want, see what they're looking at, and then I am going to have that same desire. And if I do, it actually puts me in line with the tribe in a way that is beneficial, right? Because if we all want the same thing, then we can have desire coordination. And desire coordination makes it so you can have a stable society. But all of these things came about before Instagram, right?
Yeah.
Before you have these massive collections of what is it that people want, what is it that they desire, and that like, putting your desires onto social media and then having them be these, it seems like digital mobs that are disconnected from group cohesion, right? It's like hijacking your cooperative brain and putting you in a very weird space.
Yeah, totally. And I've had the experience, I can think of at least one where, a client sold a business and they went from, being wealthy but illiquid to just extremely liquid. And we talk a lot about, how much can you afford to spend based on your goals or whatever. And like the amount he could spend was just a ton of money, like just ridiculous. And he said, I don't know if I can spend that much every year. And we're like, well, you don't have to. And he's like, well, what would it look like if I did? Like, what are your other clients spending money on? Like, do you have anybody that spends this much money a year? We're like, oh yeah. It's like, well, what do they do? Like, what do they spend money on? What should I be buying and doing that other people with this much money have? And I mean, that's really to your point. And we're just kind of like, we'd suggest that you expend it more on experiences than things. And, you do you. But we don't, right? You're right. We judge each other by everybody else. And, we have clients that just have an amazing amount of money, like hundreds of millions of dollars that still look at their friends that maybe have, billions and go, I'm not that wealthy and I can't do everything that I want to do. And on the other hand, we have other people that, are just like, I have more money than I ever thought I would ever have. And, I'm fine. So, I think, being wealthy, it really has to do with, what do you want versus what do you have, not the absolute amount of what do you have.
And this kind of goes with what we were talking about with Boyd and the vision that you have to have. Like, so I brought this idea up with you before the camera started, which is the Long Now Foundation, which is this concept started by a guy named Stuart Brand, who wrote the Whole Earth Catalog. And the idea is that agriculture started about 10,000 years ago. And once you have agriculture, then all of the other things that go along with civilization can happen much, much more rapidly. So you go from, farming to satellites and being able to launch something to Mars, right? We did that in 10,000 years. Yeah. So they asked the question.
It allowed specialization, right?
Right. So then they say, well, where will we be 10,000 years from now, right? Yeah. And trying to figure out. So they used to have this lecture series where they would ask people, tell us about what you think the future will look like in 10,000 years. And basically they gave up because nobody could even touch that. Yeah. The only thing that would be something like sci-fi, right? Like I know you're familiar with the Dark Forest. But it's an interesting idea to think about, what is the longest thing that I could do to make a difference into the future, right? Do you find that that the people that you're representing, Do they want to have a legacy that lasts
a lot
100 years or 1,000?
Yeah, a lot of them do, and they will, just in terms of the trust they create, which is pretty fascinating. So there was something, and still some states have it, but it was called a rule against perpetuity. So you couldn't create a non-charitable trust that lasted, forever. And the actual rule is interest in a trust must vest or fail within lives and being plus 21 years. So it comes out to about 100 years. But now you can create trusts in many states, including Missouri, where we are now, that go on forever. And, we've been trustee, or our families have trusts that were created in the 30s and 40s. And so what you have is these beneficiaries that didn't know the people, their ancestors. They're just like, oh, it's I'll just throw out a name, Betty Jones, my great-great-grandmother I never knew, I'm, a beneficiary of the Betty Jones 1937 trust, right? So, and, because they created the wealth and they created these trusts, also, I think the stories about these people end up living longer, right? So, there's one of our client families, the patriarch, the matriarch, died at her 80th birthday party. So she was sitting at a table, surrounded by all her children. She was like at a hotel. They were having like a party, and she said, "This was her last words. What the hell is wrong with my Red Sox?" And then collapsed on the table. And I guess she, used to have fainting spells. So they just thought, grandma or mom or whatever just fainted. So they kind of carried her to the hospital, or she was dead. So that was it. And, I think that story is pretty amazing. So if she was somebody that wasn't wealthy, it probably would have persisted somewhat. But the fact that she was so wealthy and it created all these trusts that have her name on it, it's just like this family lore of, how this matriarch died back in, I think it was the late 1970s, right? And she had created these trusts in the 30s. So it's pretty fascinating.
I'm finally at the point in my life when my friends are starting to sell businesses, and they've now come into money. If they wanted to do something what's a way that you think they should think about legacy as they've come into wealth?
Yeah, I really think it's modeling what they view as important and having that passed down through generations. Like we work with families that, we work with a family that has around $1 billion when you add up all their assets. I mean, it's not all just liquid wealth. And they don't spend very much. Like their family ethos is, we don't flaunt our money. We all work hard, and you should kind of live within your means. And they could be spending, 10 or 100 times more than what they are. And the money's just like piling up. I mean, and this is something that I think a lot of people that don't deal with really wealthy people don't understand. Like for a lot of them, their big issue is, what do we do with all this money? Yeah, and I work with a number of families that are that way, and then others, it's like, our main thing is service. Whether it's charitable or political or something. I mean, you can think almost like the Kennedy family or the Bush family, or how they, really were dedicated to service politically or service to your country. And, we have other families that, there's in every generation, people were in the military. And so I think there's things like that can make its way through the generations. We have some people that actually are great kind of books about their legacy. Here's a history of my family, and here's where we are now. And those are really cool too. I think regardless though, after a few generations, it's, who knows what's going to happen. And at the end of the day, after a few generations, I think the memory of all of us, unless we're super famous, kind of fades, right?
Yeah, and even if you are super famous, right, the thing that's left behind is a Disneyland understanding of you, right?
Yeah.
How much does Christopher Columbus love the legacy that's been left behind about him? Right. Because people know virtually nothing about him.
Or things that aren't true, like, George Washington and never telling a lie and the cherry tree and, all this. I mean, a lot of those things which aren't true are the things that are still spoken and remembered about them. So, yeah.
John, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate you coming by here doing the first.
I could talk to you all day.
Oh man, the feeling is mutual. I'm just concerned about the rest of your day. If people wanted to check out your blog, where would they go?
Yeah, so it's the IFOD, THEIFOD.com, and you can subscribe. Again, I send stuff out, 2, 3, 4 days a week. Some of them are interesting, and some of them aren't.
Well, you had said you're going to join us for book club this month.
Absolutely.
We're doing Jurassic Park, which is surprisingly horrific.
Yeah.
Have you started it yet?
I read it way back in the day. I went through and read, Andromeda Strain and Jurassic Park and a bunch of other Michael Crichtons, back, I don't know, maybe in the 90s. So I've read it previously, but I've read so many books since then. I cannot wait to start it again.
Well, so for anybody that thinks they know the Jurassic Park story, like I had no idea. So in the book, I'm not giving anything away.
Yeah.
The first 2 people to die from dinosaurs are children.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're like, whoa, this was not in the movie.
Yeah.
So we're going to do that. I don't know if you'll have a VR headset by then, but we're going to do it in VR.
Oh, well, then I will.
Okay.
There you have it.
You will love this.
Yeah,
it is fantastic. All right, John Jennings, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Vance, thank you. See you.